Everyone should have a good month. Kabbalah Satira, month of Shavuos.
Chodesh Tov, Rabbi.
Amen. Thank you. And hopefully we're going to finish chapter 4. This was quite a chapter. I did look up a little about the later poskim, the later halachic authorities about tzedakah during davening, and people collecting money and interrupting your davening and so on. And there seems to be quite a nice amount of compassion on the people fundraising, seemingly based on the fact that tzedakah is something very unique to especially brings Hashem's compassion to us. And so although there definitely is reason to make rules and limit these people who are interrupting our davening, but it seems that the Rabbanim don't want to overdo it and really put a prohibition on it. Basically, it's an opportunity to give tzedakah, and we should have mercy on these people and so on. Now, at the same time, of course, if there's a shul that has a sign and makes rules, great. But it seems that they seem to be somewhat lenient about these. For example, one of the sources here that I pulled up, person comes up with all these complaints and about and how it's really annoying. So the answer that the Rav gives him is, I read all of your questions, and it's clear that it seems from your words that it really annoys you in your davening, and therefore I will expound on this. First of all, a sign of Judaism is giving tzedakah. That's a big symbol in Judaism, that we are charitable, very charitable. And the Rambam brings that we have to be extra careful. Mitzvah tzedakah yoser, more than any other mitzvah, I say, more than any other positive mitzvah, because tzedakah, charity, is a sign, is a siman l'tzadik zera Avraham Avinu, to the children of Avram, the righteousness of the children of Avram, as it says, Yedativ Manashe Yitzaves Banav Lase Tzedakah, that he's going to command his children to give charity. So this is a very special mitzvah, and it holds up the whole foundation of our belief, of our faith, and the Yidden are redeemed only with tzedakah, and and the whole world stands on it. The Torah stands. It's Omad Hashlishi, which I assume he's referring to the three things that the world stands on: Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasadim. So it sounds like he's referring to that. He says, on the other hand, where there's Gabayim and a Rav, so for sure it would be appropriate for them to get permission to collect. And if there is no Rav, like in a shtibel, don't get angry at the people who come and collect. Even though, if you want, you could ask them in a nice way that they shouldn't interrupt the davening. Now, and he says you're not allowed to make a rule, also in a very rough way, about prohibiting collecting money in a shul. He says because the city of Sodom did that. They prohibited anyone to collect money. So, in other words, this Rav, and I don't know his name. Maybe I could look it up here. Let's see if he puts his name here. It's from the Beis Hoira HaMerkazi L'Dayanos. This is a website it's called din.org.israel.il. And let me see if he puts his name here. So he's from this Bezdin. So, let's see. He puts his name at the end.
But Rabbi, we're not asking them not to collect. We're just
Right. No, I think what they do, what you mentioned about your show, I think it's fine. I just what I'm surprised is how extreme the other side of it is, that like we how careful we have to be not to get angry at these people. And he's connecting it to the fact that the world stands on tzedakah, the geula is based on tzedakah, the redemption, the way things were done in Sodom, that they prohibited people to collect money, and then he says it is permissible to limit the time of collecting, as you're mentioning, Ezra, that it shouldn't interrupt people who are davening. Or drasha in shul, or do it only at the end of davening. If someone just pops in there once, and it wouldn't be appropriate to kick him out, because sometimes even the gabbai of the shul collects money in the middle of davening, goes around. So, and this was always something accepted. So I'm just sharing with you how at least this Rav seems to want to be very allowing of these type of situations. Yeah, you can make a rule and they should only come at the end of davening. Okay. But at the same time, he seems to be quite against getting too strict against these people because of the greatness of tzedakah. And then he says, this Rav holds that there's no difference if the person is collecting for himself or is collecting for others. I did see other poskim make a difference between that, but this Rav holds there's no difference if the fundraiser is collecting for himself, he's poor, or he's collecting for his organization that helps out other people, or there's according to this posik, according to this rabbi, there's an obligation, a biblical obligation. It's he's asking, and you shouldn't turn your eyes away. If a person is learning Torah, he's obligated to give tzedakah, and there's no exemption of involvement in a mitzvah that you're exempt from another mitzvah when you're learning Torah. And he says a reason that it doesn't apply in that scenario. But when you're davening, it would seem that you are exempt. So from learning Torah, you wouldn't be exempt, but it would seem that from davening, you are really exempt from giving tzedakah because you're involved in a mitzvah. But the minhag Yisrael is to give at the time of davening. And he says his Rav, who was Rav Moshe Feinstein, this is the rabbi of this Rav who's paskening. He says his Rav, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, would put coins on the table, and the poor people would come and just take in the middle of davening. So he didn't have to interrupt himself. He just put his coins there, and it's like you take $1, get 10 dimes, and put it in front of you, and they could all take their dimes. Nowadays, I don't know if they'll go for a dime, but 20 years ago, people would take the poor people would be happy with a dime. Now, then he says a person, Achin Adam Kazesh Gam Kasher Chavere Shayalai Be'emsa Tefila Mafsik. Oh, he says another interesting line. He says, what happens if someone taps you on the shoulder in the middle of davening and says, by the way, did you hear what's going on? You want me to tell you what just happened? And in the news, or could you get me something? Could you, do you get into, does it bother you when someone interrupts you for some uh, uh, unimportant matter during davening? Then for sure you shouldn't exempt yourself from giving tzedakah by saying, I'm too busy davening. Because if someone else interrupted you during davening, you wouldn't be angry at them, and you would attend to whatever they're asking. You need change. You want something. Uh, you know you if you would interrupt, so to speak, for someone else to to show someone something, or you know to do something, so you shouldn't use the excuse, I'm in the middle of davening, in order not to give tzedakah. Because if you don't use that excuse for secular mundane things, then you shouldn't use that excuse for I'm busy davening, I'm not giving tzedakah. You know what I mean? Don't exempt yourself by thinking that if you interrupt your davening for other matters. So that's another interesting add-on to this discussion. So anyway, this Rav, and I'm not saying everyone agrees with him, but and he does give the permit that if you want to limit it to after davening or something, the shul could, and that's acceptable. But don't fight it too much, because number one, you don't want to be like Sodom. Number two, this is something that the world stands on. The Geula, Mashiach, comes because of tzedakah. Um, and additionally, if you interrupt for other things, so not necessarily is your excuse so valid. But if you don't want to give during davening, there does seem to be a valid excuse not to give anything because you're busy doing a mitzvah. Yesterday, I quoted a ritva that was in our tractate that says if you're oisik in a mitzvah, you're not allowed to do another mitzvah because you're busy doing one mitzvah. And so according to that opinion, like it would, we could understand what the Moshe Feinstein did, would put his coins there, but he would not interrupt, so to speak, to give charity, because it could be a problem. Like you're not really allowed to interrupt. But he doesn't, I don't think he doesn't quote that here, at least I don't see it. Maybe in the notes, maybe he quotes something. But anyway, so that's this Rav. I did see some other stuff as well. But yes, Mordechai, what would you like to say?
Yeah, there's a story in Seven's book of Hasidic tales
Uh-huh.
about there was this Rav who told the shul board, "I'm very busy. I only want you to bring me to meetings if there's a new business." So they call them to a meeting, and there's a resolution to ban giving tzedakah to collectors, and the Rav said,
Is that during
I
davening or anytime?
what
Was that during davening or is that anytime? Not to give.
uh yeah, I don't remember.
Okay, okay. All right.
So yeah, so the Rav said, "Didn't I tell you that I only wanted to be called for new business?" And the chairman says, "Yeah, it is new business." And the Rav said, "No, it isn't. It's like Sodom."
Uh-huh. Right. There were such ideas in the past. Right, right. Yeah, I recall such a story. Yeah, yeah, very nice. So then there's another Rav over here, Rabbi Shmuel Ariel, who is, I guess, from another Bezdin, and um, he is dealing, of course, they're answering shilas that are asked to them, or at least, or they're making up these shilas, but so they're not necessarily exactly the same questions that they're being asked, but nevertheless, you could see from the answer that he seems to have a slightly different take on it. Um, um, let me just see if this is the right one that I was looking at before. Um, I think this is the right one. One second. I think it was a different one I was looking at. Here, this one. Yeah, I think this is what. Uh, Rabbi David Ochian. So here, is it an obligation to give everyone tzedakah? and they come. There's so many people who come in the middle of davening. How do I deal with this? So he says, when they come in the middle of davening, you are not obligated to give tzedakah, since at the time of davening you're involved in a mitzvah, and involved in a mitzvah you're exempt from another mitzvah. So he makes it very clear. The other opinion was like, it would seem that you're exempt. This Rav is clear. There's no obligation in the middle of davening. Again, a person should give tzedakah, and we've learned that before about giving tzedakah before davening. During davening, if someone comes and is interrupting you, you are not obligated, according to this Rav, to interrupt. Of course, if you want to, it's another story. That could depend on that ritva that I mentioned, but you're not obligated, according to him. And if it's not during davening, then you're obligated to help out. You shouldn't turn your eyes away from a poor person. There's a prohibition in the Torah, not to and you're not supposed to turn your eyes away, because it says don't hold back, don't harden your heart. But there are limitations even to this rule, to this halacha. The person is known to be an honest person, which most of the people we don't know, so we don't have that. Number two, so you could be exempt from giving. The number two is when the person is poor himself and he's not just a gabbai collecting for other poor people. So this Rav makes a difference. The other Pesach didn't seem to make this difference. This Rav, and he holds there's a difference between if the person is collecting for himself or if he's collecting for others. If he's collecting for others, there's no prohibition, according to this Rav, about hardening your heart and holding back and not giving. Again, of course, it's always a great mitzvah to give tzedakah, but are you transgressing if you don't give him, if he's not collecting for himself? And then the third thing is that, is it really for charity or is it for other needs? Like, for example, organizations that maybe aren't giving it as tzedakah, they're giving it for other purposes. So they might have the milah of tzedakah, but you don't have the prohibition of saying no. So he has some exemptions here about saying no to tzedakah if you're transgressing the prohibition. And in other words, the example he's giving is, number one, you don't know the person. You don't know that he's trusted, that he's a trustworthy person. He's established as a proper person, an honest person who is poor, and there's no reason to suspect him. And he says this is all applicable from the Iker Hadin, from the letter of the law. But of course, the mitzvah of tzedakah is very great, and it saves a person from all tzaras and health issues. So of course, it's always a great mitzvah to give, even if you don't, even beyond the letter of the law. But he does have these, according to the letter of the law, there are some exceptions where a person could get away, is not transgressing. And then and one of them was that he's collecting for other people, not for himself. And the third thing was that he's collecting, an exemption is if he's not really collecting for tzedakah itself, but for other mitzvahs. Like, let's say someone is making, has an organization that they give, let's say they have a yeshiva. So they're collecting for a yeshiva money for the for the school, to buy a building, for this. So that's not, it's called tzedakah, but it's not a prohibition of saying no, because it's not for the actual poor person, So anyway, you have a few exemptions there. And then the main thing that I guess we could bring from this opinion, this Rav, who's David Ochian, is the fact that he's saying that is definitely an exemption of, you're involved in a mitzvah, you're exempt from another mitzvah. And anyway, so there is, of course, discussions about all of this stuff. What it seems is, that if it does interrupt you from davening, you might want to figure out a way around it, like have some coins in front of you or dollar bills, and this way it shouldn't interrupt you during davening. And also, I think it's it definitely it makes sense to have some type of rules, where people aren't always interrupted during davening. If like Ezra was mentioning about in Young Israel, you come after davening, no problem, but don't interrupt the davening. Okay, anyway, so that touches on some of the touches on some of the mitzvah, the concept of tzedakah and how far we take it with regard to interrupting your davening and oisek by mitzvah. You're involved in one mitzvah, you exempt from other mitzvahs, and to what extent that goes. Okay, so we are holding on page Nun Amud Aleph. We're holding on page 50a, and what we've been talking about is basically three understandings of the Mishnah. The Mishnah mentioned that you're going to be pouring the water libation on Shabbos. How do you do that if you can't carry the water? So Mishnah said, well, get the water before Shabbos, but don't sanctify it in a sanctified vessel. Put it in an unsanctified vessel. That was the Mishnah's statement. The Gemara deals with, why does it have to be that way? Why does it have to be in an unsanctified container? Let it be in a sanctified container, and we should be able to get around the problem that seems to be what's creating this whole discussion. What is the problem that we're dealing with? What is the crux of the issue? The problem that we're dealing with is that there's something called lina, that you're not allowed to keep overnight and use it afterwards. You're not allowed to use afterwards something that's left overnight. Something that's holy, you left overnight, you don't use that again for the Beis Hamikdash for holy things. It's called lina. It's usur. What would be an example? An example is that they had to figure out a method of using the water that they would wash their hands and feet, the Kohen, all the Kohanim, they would wash their hands and feet. So they had to figure out a method of washing them that the water does not call that it stayed overnight. So they would somehow connect it to the source of the water, and then it wouldn't be considered that it stayed overnight because you wouldn't be allowed to use it if it stayed overnight. It's called lina. These are laws of Kodshim. Again, it's a special section of the Talmud called Kodshim. And one of the laws in Kodshim and holy things talks about sacrifices and things like that. One of those laws is the concept of lina, that you can't have something that stays overnight. And what we're dealing with here is we're talking about water libations, which really does belong in Kodshim, whether it's here in the tractate Sukkah, because the ceremony was done on Sukkot. But it really is a sacrificial type of, it's a libation that was poured on the altar. And the law of lina would kick in. Now, normally they didn't have this problem of something staying overnight. And the reason is because they would not draw the water the day before. But when it comes to Shabbos, you need to draw the water the day before. So how do you get around the problem of lina? Lina is something that's sanctified. We can't use it if it stays overnight. So the way around this problem is you use an unsanctified vessel to get the water from the spring, and by doing that, it's unsanctified, and then the next day you sanctify it on Shabbos, and you pour it at the water libation. When was the water libation ceremony? Generally, it was done together with the morning sacrifice. That was when it was done. So you would do the water libation ceremony on Shabbos day, and only then, when you were about to do that ceremony, you would sanctify the water. But before that, the day before, it was not sanctified. And if it was not sanctified, there was no problem that it stayed overnight. It's once it's sanctified, it cannot stay overnight. So that sounds to be like the understanding of the Mishnah. The problem that the rabbis had with this Mishnah, and the issue that they're dealing with is, but aren't there other avenues to take to get around this problem of lina? There are a few ways of getting around it. You don't have to use the unsanctified vessel. There's other ways around it. You could use a sanctified vessel and just take extra water. If you take extra water, then it doesn't become sanctified. And then it's not a problem of lina. It doesn't stay, it's not called sanctified water. That stayed overnight because it's you have too much water. You only need 3 lugs of water. And you took 4 lugs of water. If you take 4 lugs of water, this amount of water is not fit for the altar. So now you've gotten around the problem of lina. It's not sanctified. Only something that's fit is becomes sanctified in a holy vessel. And then there's an alternative option as well. There's another option, and that is don't have in mind that it's going to be sanctified. Have in mind that it's not sanctified. Think, I'm going to sanctify it tomorrow. I don't want it sanctified now. So if you don't have in mind that it would be sanctified, it's not sanctified. So you put it in the sanctified vessel, no problem. You put water, even if you put 3 lugs, exactly what you need. But since you're not having in mind that it should be sanctified, that should also be an avenue you could take, and then you could use the water the next day, and it's not a problem of lina because it's not considered sanctified in that it stayed overnight in its sanctified state. It never was sanctified yet because you didn't have in mind. So that's the 2 avenues that the Gemara thinks should work. So why does our Mishnah make a big deal out of doing it this way when you do have 2 other ways of doing it and getting around this problem? So the Gemara comes up with reasons why both of those avenues don't work. One reason was that our Mishnah must hold that this option doesn't work, and our Mishnah must hold that that option doesn't work. There must be some opinion that says this doesn't work. So what are those 2 reasons that's going to apply to these 2 avenues, these 2 methods? So one point is that our Mishnah must hold that you're allowed to bring 4 lugs or 5 lugs or 10 or 20 lugs of water, and there's no limit to how much water is the water libation. We mentioned in the Mishnah you need 3 lugs, but maybe that's just the minimum size. Maybe that's not a maximum. And therefore, even if you brought extra water, that would not be an avenue to take that would exempt you from lina. It would not work because you would say, oh, it's not going to be sanctified because I have 5 lugs and I only need 3, so it's not fit for the altar. The answer to that is it is fit for the altar because your minimum is 3 lugs, but you could use more. And if you pour more water, it's also fine. It's also kosher, and it'll be sanctified then. If you took 5 lugs of water and you put it in a sanctified vessel before Shabbos, and you kept it overnight, guess what's going to happen? It's going to be lina. Oh, you're going to tell me that it's too much water, so it's not going to be sanctified? It's not too much. This opinion of the Mishnah holds ein shiur lamayim. There's no maximum of water. You could use as much as you want for the libation.
But can you also just stop pouring?
I'm sorry, Isaac, are you talking to me?
Can't you also just stop pouring? You can have a 5 lug container, but stop pouring after 3.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you have too much of whatever you're using, so according to halacha, that whole entity does not become Chodesh because it's not fit. That is not fit for the sacrifice, so that's not Chodesh. It doesn't become Chodesh.
So you have to measure just precisely 3. If you have more, it's also not good.
That's right. If it's too much, the whole thing does not become sanctified.
The whole thing gets ruined.
So it has to be exact. Yeah. So that's the story here, that the Gemara says this Mishnah must hold ein shiur lamayim, that you could have extra and it's acceptable. What would be another example of such a thing where you could use extra? We'll see soon in the Gemara that there's an example where the Kohen washes his hands and his feet. How much water does he need to wash his hands and his feet? It's unlimited. You want to use 10 pails of water to wash your hands and your feet? You want to use 1? It's really, there's no specific shear for such a thing. So that would be an example of you sanctify. It's all sanctified. You fill the sink with water to wash your hands and feet. The Kohen is supposed to wash his hands and feet before he does the service. Whatever is in there is acceptable because there's no limit to how much you need to wash your hands and your feet. That doesn't have any limit. So here also, our Mishnah must hold that it's not limited to how much. You could do extra, and that would be acceptable. Now, the next point that the Gemara says is there's also a concept of das, of knowledge, of intent. Do I want this water to become sanctified? So our Mishnah must hold that your intent is not applicable. Doesn't matter. You could have intent. It does become sanctified. It doesn't become sanctified. I don't want it to become sanctified. I have intent that it shouldn't become sanctified. Whatever you have in mind doesn't play a role. If it's fit, if you're putting it in a holy vessel and it's fit to use, it will become sanctified. And therefore, the Mishnah tells you, don't use a sanctified vessel because it's going to become invalid because it's going to stay overnight. Why is it going to become invalid? I had in mind not to sanctify. It doesn't matter your intent. That's why. Your intent, according to our Mishnah holds that your intent does not play a role. And what we see in this Gemara is that even if you have intent that it should not sanctify it, in other words, not that you didn't have any intent, but even if you specifically have intent that I don't want it to sanctify it, it'll still sanctify it. That's what it would seem from the Gemara. Again, the Rishonim, it's a little unclear in the Rishonim this point, but the logic of the Gemara doesn't work unless you learn this way. In other words, yeah, you have to say that even if you have in mind that I'm not going to sanctify it, it'll still sanctify it because your intent doesn't play a role. Because otherwise, the Gemara could say, well, have in mind, don't say that it's specifically not sanctified, and then it won't sanctify, and then you could use a sanctified vessel. So the Gemara understands that these two ways, this Mishnah must hold that das doesn't play a role, your intent doesn't play a role, and Mishnah must hold that there's no shear, there's no measurement for water. That's the first way of understanding the Gemara. Then comes the second way, and then comes the third way. The second understanding of the Gemara is the opinion of Chizkiah. Chizkiah says that our Mishnah doesn't have to hold that the klishares, these holy sanctified vessels, are going to be makadish, that they're going to sanctify something even if you have no intent. No, it really only sanctifies things with intent. And he says, klishares ein makadishin el midas. Our Mishnah holds that you need to have intent, which is what we assumed initially, that would be the assumption that you need intent that it should sanctify it. Now, if that's so why don't you just use a sanctified vessel and just have intent that it's not going to sanctify it now, it'll sanctify it tomorrow? Why don't you just do that? So on this, the Gemara says that there's a gzeira, there's a decree. And the decree is that we're afraid that you'll have intent that I don't need it to be sanctified now. I don't want it sanctified now. Okay. So you did the right thing, and it's not sanctified. And the water is not puzzle, is not invalid. But what are people going to think when they see you using a holy vessel and you're filling up with water and you're using it the next day after it's been a whole day, a whole night in this vessel, and you're still using it as a water libation? What are people going to think? They're going to say, oh, I guess water libations are much more lenient. You don't have to worry about Lena. It's okay. Water libation, the libations, the nisuch, this is not a problem of Lena, and it's going to create a disaster. People are going to think that, oh, you can stay overnight. You don't have to worry. Lena is not a problem when it comes to nisachim, when it comes to libations. And the term Rashi uses, v'nafka mina chorva. A chorva, a destruction will come from this. So according to halacha, the letter of the law, you really should be able to use a sanctified vessel, but we don't want a destruction to come from this. And the rabbis made a decree that that's a gzeira. The rabbis made a decree that people are going to think that you had in mind that it should be holy, should be sanctified, and you're still using it the next day. And therefore, people are going to think that you're allowed to use libations that are that stayed overnight, and there's no problem of lina for such libations, for such things. And therefore, the rabbi said, nope, you can't use anything sanctified. So really, the Mishnah doesn't hold that your intent, it plays no role. Your intent plays a big role. But because we're nervous that people will get the wrong mistake, therefore we tell you to use an unsanctified vessel. Now comes along Rabbi Yanai, and he adds one more. He says that really there is a shear for the mayim. There is a measurement. So this is the third way of understanding the Mishnah. And that is that really there is a shear, there is a maximum of how much water you're supposed to use for the libation. How much is that? 3 lugin, according to the rabbis. We did see another opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that said 1 lug. But the rabbis hold 3 lugs of water, and which we can understand makes sense connected to the 3 lugs of the wine, which are part of the libations of sacrifices. So it's the same amount as 3 lugs of water, and the law is that that according to Rabbi Yanai, in the name in our Gemara says in the name of Reb Zera. Of course, it's a big question. Reb Zera was after Rabbi Yanai. So how is Rabbi Yanai quoting Reb Zera? Unless you say that there's 2 Rabbi Yanais. There's a Rav Yanai and Rebbe Yanai. But in any event, so it could just be it's Rabbi Yanai saying it not in the name of Reb Zera. That would be another way of understanding it. But in any event, Rabbi Yanai says that you could say that the Mishnah holds there's a measurement, there's a maximum how much water. And there's also a concept of intent. And the rabbis hold of both of these, the Mishnah holds of both of these issues. And really, the Mishnah could have gotten away with, according to the letter of the law, you could have gotten away with using a sanctified vessel. But here, there's a different issue. Here, there's a, well, similar, I should guess you could say, to Chizkiah. But he says here, the issue is that what are we nervous of? We are nervous that what happened here, the people are going to think that you sanctified this water because you're going to use it for the Kohen Gadol to wash his hands and his feet. That's going to be what this water is meant for. Now, you did that. And if that's so, now you've decided to use it for the libation. So you planned on using it for with the intent that it's going to be for the hands and the feet of the Kohen Gadol. And let me read it in Rashi. I think it'll be easier to understand. Rashi is on the side of the page, on the right side of the page, page 50a. Rashi, Gezerah Shema Yomer L'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So there's a Gezerah, there's a decree over here that people are going to say that you took this water initially for the Kohen Gadol to sanctify his hands and his feet. LeKohen Gadol Milum, the Kidshim Bekli. You made it sanctified. Why? She'ein mekadshin yodayim v'raglayim el b'mayim mekudashin. Because in order for a Kohen Gadol to sanctify his hands and his feet, it needs to be holy water that's been sanctified. So you sanctified this water. Dumya the kiyur shenimshach b'shemen hamishcha, similar to the sink that was used for this purpose. By the regular Kohanim, they would always use the sink, and for Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol would use like a barrel. But for the regularly they use this kiyur, the sink, which was made from the copper of at least in the Mishkan, it was made from the copper from the mirrors that the Jewish women used when they were in Egypt. And so that was the kiyur, and it was sanctified with the shemen hamishcha, with the anointing oil, and it sanctifies the water that's in this sink, and it would sanctify the water. And that's the water that normally was used. The Haim L'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, that water was used for the sanctification of the hands and the feet. Before the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol would do the service in the temple, they would always have to be Mekadesh Yadav V'Raglav. And before they changed their clothing, they would do the Kohen Gadol, when he changed his clothing, on Yom Kippur, he would do it 10 times for 5 changes of clothing. Before he changed and after he changed, each time he would have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, would have to pour this water from the sink on his hands and his feet. But even this ketone, this some type of barrel of water that was made out of gold, they would also do this. The Kohen Gadol would use for the to sanctify his hands and his feet, like we say in the Amrinam Seder Yuma, Perak Terafakal, even Kiddush Hayir. It was holy. It was a sanctified vessel, just like the kiyar was, just like the sink. Okay, so here comes the main point. What's going to happen is they're going to come and say that you probably filled this water in this barrel that's made out of gold. You filled it for the purpose of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, v'les lehu shiura, and really that there's no measurement. So it really is holy because there's no limit to how much water you need for the hands and feet. Shafilu have a kuf lug, and even 100 lug is ru'uyin heim l'kli. It's fit for this vessel, vinas kadshu, when it becomes holy. V'chichazi de menaschi lehu, and then when they see that you're actually using it for the libations, amar ein lina mayelas ben asachim. Now they're going to say that, you know what? There is no a prohibition of lina, of something that stays overnight when it comes to libations. So what's going to happen here? You really have no problem, according to the letter of the law. Why? You put more than 3 lugs in this barrel. You put 10 lugs. You put 5, 10, 20, 100 lugs in the barrel. It's not going to be sanctified. Why? Because when you put more than 3 lugs, according to this opinion, Rabbi Yanai, it's not, the Mishnah won't hold it. It's not sanctified. It's too much. You put too much. It's not fit for the purpose. So it's not going to be sanctified. You put it in a sanctified vessel, but it won't sanctify the water because it's too much. It's not the right amount. Additionally, you had in mind that it's not supposed to be sanctified today on Friday until Shabbos kicks in, until tomorrow, Shabbos, then it's going to be sanctified. I'm not sanctifying it now. You had in mind clearly that you don't want it sanctified now, sanctified tomorrow before you pour it. So you clearly have no problem biblically with using this water. But what are people going to think? People are going to think that the water is sanctified. Really? How are they going to think that? The water, I have 100 lugs. How are they going to come up with this idea, this mistaken idea that it was sanctified? So the answer is that they're going to think that I used it for the wash. We're using it for the Kohen Gadol to wash his hands and his feet. Then there's no shir lamayim. Then there's no limit. That could be, you could use as much water as necessary as you want to sanctify the hands and the feet. That's sanctified. You used 100, but that's good. That water was probably meant, you sanctified it. It's holy water. Oh, you didn't have in mind? Nah, you had in mind. You want to use it for sanctification. So people are going to think that the water became sanctified. Why are they going to think it became sanctified? Because they think you're using it for Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, which number one is, if you're using it for Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, you've sanctified it. You had in mind to sanctify it. And number two, even if it has a large amount, it was sanctified. So people are going to think it's sanctified. Then they see you using it for the libation. They're going to say, oh, I guess libations you could use, no problem. You could use water that's sanctified and it stayed overnight. So that's what people are going to think. It's going to come out a whole destruction from this whole thing. It's going to create a disaster. And because of that, the rabbi said, you know what, just use unsanctified utensil, a barrel. And if it's unsanctified, no one's going to come up with the wrong mistake. And therefore, it's going to be kosher to use for the Shabbos libation that you're going to keep it in until you keep it in this barrel until you need it, and then you put it into a sanctified barrel, and then it'll become sanctified, and then pour it as a water libation on Shabbos. So that's the conclusion of the Gemara, 3 ways of learning the Gemara. And now we're up to the final little piece here in the Gemara, and that is Nishbacha ineskalsa, and that is 6 lines from the top, 7 lines from the top of the page.
Rabbi,
Nishbacha, yeah.
in the second way in which it was, why didn't they use the Marat Ayin explanation that the fact that the water was in there for overnight in the golden vessel, and then was used the following day, and people would know that in itself would make the water the process of lina. Why would
Yeah. I hear you. You're asking a good question, Ezra. Ezra's wondering why doesn't the Gemara mention like Marasayan? The Gemara is saying that it's only if it's das, if you had in mind, and people are going to think that you had in mind. And but what about Marasayan? So the answer, I think, to that question is that the whole Marasayan concept only applies if it actually would be invalid. And the whole concept of being invalid would only be if you had that in mind. So in other words, it's not only someone sees this and Marasayan. It's Marasayan because someone sees it and they're going to think that you did this wrong and it ultimately is invalid. In other words, you're using water that was used overnight. Okay, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with using water that was overnight. It was only if it's in a sanctified vessel. And it's only if this sanctified vessel you had in mind that it should sanctify it. In other words, it has to fit the criteria. That's what the Gemara's Chizkiah is saying, that it has to fit that criteria to be Marasayan. Marasayan is, in fact, that's what the Gemara is thinking, that you probably had that in mind, and that's why it's Marasayan. In other words, the Gemara has to add that point. There's no Marasayan unless the person who's seeing it is going to understand the rules that also have to be met to make it a Marasayan. You know what I mean? Like, you have to add that point. You're asking, why do we need this point of the das? It's Marasayan even without the das. No, it's not really Marasayan without the das, because there's no Marasayan. You did nothing wrong. It's only Marasayan if there's a way that it would be a problem. You know what I mean? Marasayan is only if it's actually could be a problem. It's not because it sounds like it might be a problem. It actually is a problem if it's done this way. So you're right. The guy didn't do it in a wrong way, but it's Marasayan because someone will see, and he'll think that you did it in that way. You know what I mean? Like the Marasayan it includes the method of how you did it in a wrong way. That's what makes it Marasayan. It's not just a Marasayan automatically. You get what I'm saying, Ezra? Yeah, you're muted, so I don't know if you're agreeing or disagreeing.
Because, for example, someone, as an example, an individual comes from outside of North Miami Beach, comes on Shabbat, and he sees people carrying. From his standpoint, let's say if he comes from Brooklyn, where there is no Eruv, he might say they're doing something wrong, and that points to Maratayan from his standpoint. Whereas the people who live there, they know they're doing the right thing. It's not a problem. So I'm asking the same,
Right. Right. So you're saying Marasayan normally is it's either it is or it isn't. You see a Marasayan, it looks wrong. It's a problem, Marasayan. Okay, you're gonna say now carrying is so popular, everyone knows that carrying all the from communities have Eruv, so it's not a problem, or they don't know that, so then it is a problem. Marasayan is black and white. That's what you're saying. I hear you. But the thing is, there are certain halachas that are really dependent on numerous rules. Like our example here is the rule of lina, which depends on, did you have kavana? Did you have too much water? So in order to say that this is a Marasayan prohibition, you need to add those conditions to it. So the guy is going to say you did something wrong, and I guess it's not a problem. you need to add that point. So Chizkiah adds that point. He says, someone's going to see that you use this water, and they're going to say that it's going to be okay, and they're gonna think that you did it in a way that would have been prohibited, and they're gonna say it's permissible. What is their real thought process? So it goes through it, and it says the thought process would be that you really need to have das. You need to have in mind that it's going to be niskadish. And they're going to think you did have that in mind, and yet it's still kosher to use for a libation. So he adds the point of the das, because that's what's ultimately going to be the problem that he's going to be mistaken with. He's going to say you did have das, and therefore it is a problem. And except for the fact it must be libations or not, we don't care about. And so the answer to him is that what's the real answer to this guy? The answer is we're gonna make a rule because of you. But in truth, the guy did nothing wrong because he didn't have that in mind. You know what I mean? He had in mind that it won't be holy. But you think that he did have in mind that it's going to be holy, and therefore you're going to come to your conclusion. Yet the Gemara has to add that point, because otherwise it's just a person who's mistaken. That we're not a person who doesn't know the law even. You know what I mean? He's totally unfamiliar with the conditions. Here we have to say, no, this is a rule. You need to have das. You're going to think he had das, and the answer is that that it's still a problem. The answer is no. That you're wrong. First of all, he didn't have that das that you're thinking he had, and your conclusion is a wrong conclusion. But it adds that point, because that's part of the maris ayin that you're developing here. That you're saying it's creating the Gemara really is saying this is a maris ayin issue. But it's fitting it into the rules of the law that we're dealing with. It's fitting it into those rules. The rules include a concept of das. So the maris ayin, has to mention that. Anyway, I have to think of a better way to word it. Maybe it's not coming across well, but that's the understanding here, is that this is a maris ayin. What you're saying is correct. It's a maris ayin issue, but it has to add the concept of das, because that's a crucial point to the rule of this maris ayin. If you don't have the das problem, then the guy is just totally unaware of anything. He doesn't know any laws. He's coming up with his own, You have to add that the das is the main thing, that he thinks you must have had das, and therefore he's going to say that it doesn't matter. Now, the Gemara is coming with the assumption that das is crucial in order to make it sanctified, and he's going to have to come on to saying that it must be sanctified, must have had das. If he doesn't come to that das, then who says it's sanctified? Where's your maris ayin? Who said I sanctified it? You know what I mean? You could knock off the whole maris ayin issue and say, well, who says there's no eruv in this North Miami Beach? There's an eruv. Who says there's no eruv? Well, maris ayin? What are you talking about? So you have to add that he must have had das. The guy is assuming that it must have had das. This is a tiny community. You must not have an eruv. Oh, maris ayin. You only have five yidden that live here. You have an eruv. Then you could say maybe there's a maris. I mean, of course, you have to speak to Rabbanim about the maris ayin. I don't know if there is a maris ayin about an eruv. It's so popular, an eruv. It's a nice example, but I don't know how practical it is. People have eruvs even on just their own private property in cities, but I don't know how big of a community it is. That's no maris ayin. Something to look into about maris ayin with eruvs. But okay, let's try to finish up over here. So the Gemara says nishbacha einiskal. So again, we're 7 lines from the top, and 50a, page 50a. We're finishing up the chapter. So it says, if it poured out this water, you did this whole thing. You got the water the day before, and you worked it out. It's not a problem of lina. Amazing. Guess what happens? It spilled, or even worse, you left it uncovered. It's a nisgalsa. You left it uncovered, and now we're worried that a snake came and put venom in it, and then it's either not going to be appropriate with the venom, or it's not enough water. You have a big problem. So what are you going to do? The Gemara asks, what's the big problem of the venom from the snake? What's the big problem? It was left uncovered. Use a filter. Liavid b'misnenes, liavir, excuse me, pass it through b'misnenes in a filter, in a sifter, a filter. And so the Gemara says, Lema masnisin like Reb Nechemya. Must be that our Mishnah doesn't agree with Reb Nechemya, because Reb Nechemya has a method that you could use. He says you could use a filter. So the Mishnah must not go like Reb Nechemya. The tiny, because we have a brisa misnenes. If you have a filter or a sifter, and it's yesh by, maybe there's some other term used for when you filter out liquids. I guess filter. Okay, so a filter that misanenas yesh by mishum giloy. There is a problem of if you leave the wine. You have a misnenes on top of a barrel, and it's filtering out the wine from the sediments, and the wine is pouring through. And now yesh by mishum giloy. There is an issue if you leave it uncovered. There's an issue. You left it uncovered. Now, you are filtering out the sediments, but the problem is you also left it uncovered afterwards. So if you left it uncovered, it doesn't help. There is an issue of giloy. One second. Excuse me.
They think that snakes do that to wine also?
Just let me just say this one more time, because I said something I shouldn't have said, because it applies to Reb Nechemya. Let me just say this one more time, then you could ask what you say. The Tanya we learned in a brisa, misanenes yesh by mishum giloy. When you have a filter and you filter the wine through this that has sediments in it through the filter, and the wine goes through it, and the sediments stay on top. There is an issue with giloy, with the fact that there's an issue, the fact that it was uncovered before, even though you're filtering it, we're afraid that some of the venom goes through the filter. The sediments won't, but the venom might go through. So yesh by mishum giloy, there's a problem of the fact that it was uncovered before. Now comes Amar Reb Nechemya. Reb Nechemya says, Amosai, when does that apply? Bisman shehatachtoina megula. That applies only if it's still revealed, or it's revealed afterwards, it's uncovered afterwards. And then you're going to tell me, oh, I filtered it, but the fact is, it still could have gotten venom from a snake afterwards because it was left uncovered afterwards. But if the bottom barrel is totally covered and you filtered, even though the top is uncovered and there might be venom in the top part of the wine that's going through it, there's no problem of being uncovered. The fact that there's venom, the venom of a snake is similar to a sponge that floats. It'll stay in its place. It's not going to go through the filter. So there's an argument between the Tanakama of this brisa, the first opinion, and Reb Nechemya, who's the second opinion. The first opinion holds we're afraid venom goes through the filter and it's going to go into it, and therefore you can't use it. Reb Nechemya holds that venom will be stopped by the filter. It'll float on top, and it's not going to go through it. And therefore, you would be able to use filtered wine, even though we might be nervous that a snake initially drank from it and put venom in it. No problem. You filter it out, and it's fine. So Reb Nechemya holds of a filter. So the Gemara says, our Mishnah doesn't seem to hold of a filter. Our Mishnah says, oh, you got to come up with another plan. The water spilled, you got to get water from somewhere else. What do you mean? Or the water was left uncovered. Excuse me. The case was the water was left uncovered. Now we got to get water from somewhere else. What do you mean? The water was left uncovered. Filter it out and use the same water. So Reb Nechemya holds that you could filter it out. So obviously our Mishnah doesn't follow Reb Nechemya. That's what the Gemara understands, because Reb Nechemya has an option of filtering it. The Tanakhama holds you can't filter doesn't work. It'll go through it. But Reb Nechemya holds filter works. And the Gemara answers that you're right. Reb Nechemya holds a filter works. That's for a regular person to drink it. But to serve it to Hashem, even with a filter, you think that's right? You filtered out the poison. You're gonna serve that to the king. You're gonna serve it to a governor. You're gonna give that as a gift. You filtered out the dirt. But is this appropriate? So the Gemara says that's why we don't use it. Yeah, you could filter it. Maybe you could filter it and get the venom out. But is that appropriate to use as a libation? That's the conclusion of the Gemara, that our Mishnah could even go like Reb Nechemia. Reb Nechemia holds you could filter it if you want to drink it yourself, but don't go and give it as a libation. The Gemara says, Afilu Temer Reb Nechemia. You could even say that our Mishnah fits with Reb Nechemia. Amar, let's say, the Amar Reb Nechemia. Reb Nechemia says, Lehedyet, for a regular person. Aval Gavaya, but for Hashem. Mi Amar, does he say such a thing? You could filter it and then use it as a libation? But let's lay the Reb Nechemia. Does Reb Nechemia not hold of the problem that it mentions in the Pasuk in Malachi, where it talks about in things that are inappropriate for Hashem? It says over there, would you bring this for your minister, to the governor? Would he be appeased, and would he be show grace to you? Amar Hashem Tzavakes, Hashem says, would you do that for the king? For the minister, for the governor, would you do such a thing? So that is the conclusion of the Gemara, that this would not be appropriate. Even if you could use a filter, it would not be appropriate to use it for Hashem. And now we'll conclude. Hadron Allah Lulav Arava, may it return to us. Chapter Lulav Arava, we shouldn't forget it. And Mitzvah Hashem, tomorrow we'll start the chapter. Mazel tov, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Your timing is perfect.
Rabbi.
Yes.